Welcome, gentle listener, to Whispers of the Night. This is a quiet place where stories move slowly and the world is allowed to rest. Here, we follow soft voices, forgotten places, and moments that ask nothing from you except your presence. Before we begin tonight's journey, take a breath with me. Let the day loosen its hold. Let your thoughts slow just a little. If these stories bring you comfort, if the night feels kinder when you are here, I invite you to subscribe and become part of this quiet circle. You can also like this story to help it find other dreamers who need gentle words before sleep. And if you wish, leave a comment, not to speak loudly, but to whisper back. Now settle in. Our story begins beneath the stars. Before the voice of the story rises, let us rest together for a moment. Sit comfortably or lie down, allowing your body to be fully supported. Gently close your eyes. Take a slow breath in through your nose and let it out softly through your mouth. Feel your shoulders lowering. Feel the quiet weight of gravity holding you safely. Imagine the night sky above you. Wide, endless, calm, no urgency, no demand with each breath. Imagine distant stars, dimming just enough to make space for rest. If thoughts appear, do not chase them away. Let them drift, like clouds crossing a moonlit sky. Your breathing finds its own rhythm. Now feel the stillness between each breath. That pause is yours. Nothing is required there. Your body knows how to rest. Your mind knows how to soften. Imagine a gentle hill beneath you, cool stone warmed by memory, the sky listening patiently above. You are safe here. You are unhurried. You are allowed to simply be. When you are ready, when your breathing feels steady and your thoughts feel distant, the story will meet you gently, exactly where you are. Whispers from the Ancient Observatory. The hill that watched the sky. Lyra reached the hill just as the light began to thin. When the day loosened its grip on the land and allowed evening to breathe, the wind met her first steady, patient, combing through the tall grasses, as if it had been waiting far longer than she had. Each step upward felt deliberate, not heavy, but meaningful, as though the hill itself measured her approach and found it acceptable. She paused once to look back. Below her, the world softened into shadow. Distant fields dimmed into muted blues. The road she had taken dissolved into a pale ribbon, and the village lights flickered to life, one by one, uncertain and far away. None of it called to her. Whatever had drawn her here did not belong to the land below. At the crown of the hill, the observatory stood in quiet ruin. Its stone walls were fractured but proud, curved in a way that suggested purpose even in decay. A broken dome rested above like a hollowed shell, its metal ribs exposed to the open sky. Time had taken much from its doors, weathered into uneven shapes. Carvings softened by rain and wind, but it had not erased the feeling that this place once watched the heavens with devotion. The structure did not feel abandoned. It felt paused. Lyra stood still, her coat tugging gently in the wind, and felt a subtle tightening in her chest. Not fear, recognition. She had never been here before. She was certain of that. And yet, the observatory greeted her like something long remembered rather than newly discovered. The stones seemed to hold their breath. The air felt dense with an attention she could not see but could sense, the way one feels eyes upon them in the dark. Without knowing from where, she stepped closer. The ground beneath her boots was uneven, scattered with small fragments of stone and rusted metal. Her footsteps sounded louder than she expected, each one echoing briefly before the wind carried it away. She slowed, instinctively quiet, as if noise might disturb something fragile. At the entrance, she hesitated. The doorway was partially collapsed, its arch fractured, but intact enough to pass through. She placed her hand against the stone, cool and rough beneath her fingers. A faint vibration pulsed, there not movement, not sound, but something subtler, like the afterimage of a bell long since struck. Lyra drew in a breath and crossed the threshold. Inside, the observatory opened into a circular chamber exposed to the sky above. Where the dome had once enclosed the stars, now there was only open air, deepening into indigo. The first stars had begun to appear small, sharp points of light, tentative but steady. They looked closer from here, as if the hill itself lifted the world toward them. The wind moved differently inside the chamber, curling rather than rushing, carrying whispers of dust and memory. Old instruments lay scattered along the walls, a cracked brass armillary sphere, half buried beneath debris, shattered lenses dulled by time, fragments of charts etched with symbols she did not recognize. None of it felt random, even in ruin. There was an order to the space, an intention that lingered like a held note. Lyra walked slowly around the circle, her gaze tracing the walls. In places, faint markings were still visible, lines carved into the stone, arcs and dots arranged in careful patterns. Star maps, she realized, not representations of the sky as it was now, but as it had once been, or perhaps as it was meant to be seen. She reached out, following one carved arc with her fingertip. As she did, a soft pressure bloomed behind her eyes, not painful, but insistent. Images flickered at the edge of her perception, hands moving with purpose, voices murmuring in low tones. The slow rotation of the sky above through an intact dome. The sensation faded as quickly as it came, leaving her heart beating faster. She pulled her hand back, unsettled. And then, despite herself quietly awed, Lyra had always been sensitive to places like this. Old bridges, abandoned libraries, empty theaters after dusk. Places that remembered being useful, places that held echoes. She had learned long ago not to dismiss the way her chest tightened or warmed in certain spaces, the way silence sometimes felt layered rather than empty. But this was different. This place felt aware. She moved toward the center of the chamber, where a circular platform rose slightly from the ground. It was smoother than the surrounding stone, worn not by neglect but by use. When she stepped onto it, the air seemed to shift, as though the observatory adjusted around her presence. Above, more stars emerged. The sky deepened, the blue darkening toward velvet black, and the stars came alive in clusters and lines. Lyra tilted her head back, breath-catching. She had seen the night sky countless times, but never like this. From the hill, from within the bones of this ancient structure, the stars felt near enough to touch, their light sharp and intentional. A strange warmth spread through her, beginning at her sternum and moving outward, slow and steady. Not excitement, not fear, belonging. "I came because you called," she whispered, unsure why the words formed at all. The wind stirred, passing through the broken dome ribs, producing a low, resonant hum. It was not a voice, but it answered her all the same. The stones beneath her feet seemed to vibrate in quiet agreement. Lyra closed her eyes behind her eyelids. Darkness gave way to motion. She saw the observatory as it once was, whole, alive, with lamplight and movement. Figures moved around her, their faces indistinct, but their focus intense. The dome above rotated smoothly, aligning and opening with a specific portion of the sky. Instruments gleamed, the air thrummed with anticipation. She felt it then, the purpose of the place. It was not merely to observe the stars, but to listen. To them, her eyes snapped open. The vision vanished, leaving only the present, the ruined walls, the open sky, the stars continuing their patient emergence. Her breath came a little faster now, her pulse loud in her ears. "That's impossible," she murmured. Though she did not fully believe it, she stepped off the platform, grounding herself, and walked to the edge of the chamber where a section of wall had collapsed outward. From there, the hill sloped away sharply, offering an unobstructed view of the horizon. The land below lay hushed, as if evening had tucked it in. Above, the stars continued to assemble, forming patterns older than language. Lyra sat on the stone ledge, pulling her coat tighter around herself. The cold had crept in without her noticing, but she welcomed it. It anchored her. She tried to make sense of the pull that had brought her here. There had been no map, no signpost, just a restlessness she could not name, a recurring dream of standing beneath a turning sky, of listening rather than looking. She had woken from it, night after night, with the same quiet ache in her chest. Now, she understood why the dream had never shown her a face. This place was the face. As the night deepened, the observatory changed. Shadows lengthened and softened, and the stars brightened until they seemed to press closer to the broken rim of the dome. Lyra noticed then that certain stars aligned with the carved markings on the walls, their light slipping perfectly into the grooves as if guided there. When one such alignment occurred, the air shifted again, a tone not heard, but felt passed through the chamber. Lyra stiffened, every nerve alight. The sensation resonated through her bones, through the quiet spaces inside her where words had never quite fit. It was not a sound meant for ears. It was meant for those who knew how to listen without them. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, surprising her. She was not sad. She was overwhelmed by the sense of being seen by the sky, by the past, by something vast and patient that had noticed her small, quiet existence and deemed it relevant. "I don't know what you want from me," she said softly. The stars did not answer in words. Instead, the tone shifted, softened, becoming less insistent. Not a demand, an invitation. Lyra exhaled slowly. The loneliness she had carried for so long, the feeling of standing slightly out of sync with the world eased. just a fraction. Perhaps she had not been alone at all. Perhaps she had simply been early. She remained there until the chill deepened and the moon rose pale and watchful at the edge of the sky. When at last she stood to leave, she did so reluctantly, casting one final glance at the observatory's silent circle. As she stepped beyond the threshold, the wind rose again, wrapping briefly around her like a farewell. Behind her, the hill watched the sky, just as it always had, and now it had found someone who could listen back. Dust, stone, and star maps. Morning came to the hill reluctantly, as though the sun itself hesitated to intrude upon what the night had claimed. When Lyra returned, the sky was pale and quiet, washed in thin light that softened the edges of everything it touched. The observatory no longer loomed against the dark. Instead, it rested beneath the open blue like a relic set gently on display. She paused at the threshold again, but this time the hesitation felt different. Last night had been discovery. Today felt like permission. Inside, daylight revealed details she had not seen before. Dust lay thick across the stone floor, disturbed only by her own footprints from the night before. The circular chamber still opened to the sky, but now the stars were gone, replaced by drifting clouds that moved slowly, thoughtfully, as if continuing some private conversation. The broken ribs of the dome cast long curved shadows across the floor, dividing the space into quiet segments of light and shade. Lyra moved carefully, aware of how easily sound traveled here. Each step stirred faint echoes that brushed the walls before settling back into stillness. The observatory felt different by day, not silent, but listening. She passed through an arched opening at the far side of the main chamber and entered what must once have been the chart room. The ceiling here had partially collapsed, but enough remained to shelter the space from the open sky. Dust hung in the air, illuminated by slanted beams of light that filtered through cracks in the stone. The smell was dry and mineral, layered with the faint metallic temps of old instruments. Along the walls, shelves sagged beneath the weight of time. Rolled parchments lay bundled in disarray, some bound with brittle cord, others unfurled and half disintegrated. Star charts covered the stone surfaces, etched, painted inked layer upon layer, as if each generation had refused to erase the work of the last. Symbols overlapped, lines intersected, constellations shifted subtly from one map to the next, evolving like a living language. Lyra approached the nearest chart, drawn directly onto the wall. The stone beneath her fingertips was cold, the grooves worn smooth by countless hands. As she traced a familiar arc, the sensation returned, that gentle pressure behind her eyes, the quiet tightening in her chest. This time, she did not pull away. The room seemed to exhale. At first, she thought the sound was the wind slipping through the cracks overhead, but it did not move like air. It lingered, gathered, pressed softly against her awareness. The whispers did not form words. They formed impressions, fragments of thought, of intention, of careful observation, repeated over centuries. Patience, attention, wait. Lyra swallowed, her breath shallow. The sensation was intimate, like standing too close to someone lost in thought, and catching the echo of it without meaning to. These were not voices meant to be heard. They were residues, memories, embedded in the act of watching the sky night after night. Year after year, she stepped deeper into the room. A large brass instrument rested on a stone table at the center, its surface dulled but intact. Rings intersected. When Lyra brushed away a layer of dust, the metal caught the light, revealing careful craftsmanship beneath the tarnished dot. The moment her fingers touched the brass, the whispers intensified. She saw hands, a gun older hands, younger ones, steady and trembling alike. She felt the weight of long nights, of aching backs and stiff fingers, of eyes trained upward until the stars burned into them. She sensed the quiet devotion of those who believed the sky was not distant but responsive, that it listened as much as it shone. Lyra drew back sharply, heart racing. The instrument remained still, inert, the room unchanged. Only she had shifted. She pressed a hand to her chest, grounding herself, and let out a slow breath. The experience was overwhelming, but not frightening. It felt like being entrusted with something fragile, not exactly, but context, meaning she moved to one of the shelves and carefully unrolled a parchment. The paper crackled softly, protesting the disturbance. The chart upon it was intricate, dense with markings far more complex than modern star maps. Lines curved not only between stars, but through them, as though charting movement rather than position. Marginal notes crowded the edges, written in a careful script that grew increasingly fluid toward the bottom. Lyra could not read the language, but she understood its urgency. This wasn't just astronomy, she murmured. It was listening. The whispers responded not louder, but closer. She realized then that the sounds were not entering the room. They were rising from within it, from the walls, the floor, the instruments, the dust itself. Every surface carried traces of the people who had once filled this place with quiet purpose. Stone remembered pressure, glass remembered light, metal remembered touch, and Lyra, standing among them, was receptive. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, parchment resting loosely in her hands. The cool stone seeped through her coat, steadying her. She closed her eyes and allowed the impressions to wash over her without trying to shape them. She felt the passing of time, not as years, but as cycles. Nights layered upon nights, skies observed. Through seasons, through shifts so subtle they required generations to notice. The observatory had been a listening post, not only to the stars, but to time itself. A sudden clarity bloomed within her. The whispers were not calling her to uncover secrets or claim forgotten power. They were asking her to witness, to acknowledge what had been done here and what had been lost when the listening stopped. The observatory did not mourn its ruin. It mourned its silence. Lyra opened her eyes. Light had shifted while she sat there. The sun now angled lower, casting longer shadows that crept slowly across the chart room floor. Dust motes drifted lazily through the beams, each one catching the light like a tiny star in its own right. She smiled faintly, rising. She began to move through the room with a different attention now, slower, more deliberate. She touched instruments, gently, not to awaken memories, but to acknowledge them. Each contact brought a quiet echo, not overwhelming, just present. A mutual recognition. At the far end of the room, she found a narrow stairwell descending into shadow. The steps were worn smooth, their edges softened by countless passages. Cold air rose from below, carrying the scent of stone untouched by sunlight. Lyra stood at the top, listening. The whispers here were deeper, more subdued, older. She did not descend, not yet. Some instincts did not need explanation. The observatory had revealed what it wished to reveal for now. Pushing further would not deepen the connection. Patience would. She turned back instead, returning to the main chamber. The open sky above felt different in daylight, less intimate, but no less attentive. Clouds drifted past the broken dome, and for a moment, Lyra imagined them as moving charts, temporary constellations forming and dissolving. She sat once more at the center platform, resting her hands on her knees. "I hear you," she said quietly, unsure whether she spoke to the observatory, the memories within it, or the stars themselves. The response came not as sensation, but as calm. When she finally left, she did so slowly, pausing often to look back, to take in the curve of the walls, the scatter of instruments, the layered maps. Nothing shifted as she departed. Nothing closed itself to her dot outside the hill, stretched wide and quiet beneath the afternoon sky. The wind moved through the grass with its usual patience. Lyra descended the slope with dust on her hands and a strange steadiness in her chest. She knew she would. Return the observatory had begun to speak not in words, but in remembered attention, and she was learning how to listen. Voices between the constellations. Midnight arrived without ceremony. The hill did not announce it, nor did the sky. It simply happened the moment when darkness settled fully into itself and the world grew thin, as though something vast had exhaled and left behind only what was essential. Lyra stood within the observatory's open circle, breath faintly visible in the cold. The stars above were sharp tonight, numerous and unwavering, filling the broken dome with a depth that made the ruin feel less like a wound and more like an offering. Moonlight traced pale lines along the stone floor, illuminating dust, cracks, and the quiet geometry of age. She had waited for this hour. The old telescope rested where she had uncovered it earlier that evening, half buried beneath fallen stone and rusted fittings. It was longer than she had expected, its brass body scarred but intact, mounted on a heavy base etched with symbols similar to those carved into the walls. Clearing it had taken time and care. Every movement felt ceremonial, as if haste might offend the patience of the place. Now, with the sky fully awake, she approached it again, her fingers wrapped around the cool metal. The familiar sensation stirred immediately, not the overwhelming flood of memory she had felt before, but a focused tension, like a held breath. She adjusted the telescope slowly, following instinct rather than knowledge, aligning it with a narrow opening between the broken ribs of the dome. The moment the lens settled, the whispers returned. They did not rush in, they rose. The air around her thickened, not with sound, but with presence. Lyra felt it along her arms, her neck, the quiet places behind her eyes. The observatory seemed to recede, its stone boundaries softening as the sky took precedence. For a moment, she was unsure where she ended and the night began. She leaned forward and looked through the lens. The stars leaped closer, not merely magnified, but clarified. Their light sharpened into something layered, textured, as though each point held depth rather than distance. She gasped softly, the sound swallowed immediately by the night. As she adjusted the focus, something shifted. The space between the stars began to glow. Not light exactly, but movement threads, faint and luminous, stretching from one star to another, forming patterns. Too fluid to be fixed, they pulsed gently, responding to one another and to her. The constellations she recognized blurred, their rigid shapes giving way to something older and more organic. Then the whispers changed. They began to coalesce. Lyra did not hear names or words, but she felt stories brushing against her awareness. Brief impressions surfaced, someone standing exactly where she stood now, hands steady on the telescope despite the cold. Another sitting on the stone floor nearby, scribbling notes by lamplight. A third gazing upward with tears in their eyes, overwhelmed by the same quiet wonder that now filled Lyra's chest. These were not memories shown to her, they were shared. Her knees weakened, and she sank to the floor beside the telescope, still looking through the lens. The sky did not fade, it waited. She understood then that the observatory had never been a place of solitary study. It was a convergence. Those who came here did so not to impose meaning upon the stars, but to meet them halfway, to listen in a way that required stillness, humility, and time. Lyra felt a presence beside her, not physical, not visible, but undeniable. It carried no shape, no voice, only intention. She sensed curiosity, recognition, and something like relief. You remember, the presence seemed to say not as sound, but as certainty. I don't, Lyra whispered. I don't remember any. Of this, the response was gentle, not with your mind. The stars above shifted again, and a new pattern emerged within the lens. She saw a younger version of herself. No, not herself, but someone so similar the distinction felt irrelevant. A girl standing on a different hill beneath a different sky, her dark hair caught by the wind, her eyes lifted in the same quiet concentration. She held no telescope, no instrument at all. She listened with nothing but her attention. Lyra's breath caught painfully in her chest. I've never been here before, she insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. The presence did not argue. Instead, it showed her fragments, lives lived lightly, deliberately, always drawn to the night. People who did not always remain long in one place, who felt most at home beneath open skies and unfinished structures. They came, they listened, they left, and some returned. The observatory did not bind them, it recognized them. A sense of continuity threaded through it, all not reincarnation in the way stories told it, but something quieter, a recurring alignment. Certain minds, certain sensitivities, arriving when the sky required witnesses. Lyra pulled away from the telescope, gasping, her vision blurring. The night rushed back in, cold and immediate. The observatory walls reasserted themselves, solid and real. She pressed her palms to the stone floor, grounding herself. That's not possible, she murmured again. but the words felt hollow. Now, possibility had little meaning here. She rose slowly and stepped onto the central platform. Above her, the stars shimmered, subtly rearranging. The whispers intensified, not louder, but closer still, as though narrowing their focus. Lyra felt a pull, not toward any one star, but toward the space between them. She lifted her gaze and, without thinking, lifted her hands as well. The air responded. A faint vibration passed through her palms, through the platform beneath her feet. The observatory hummed, not audibly, but with a resonance that aligned perfectly with her breathing. The sensation was overwhelming in its intimacy. She was not activating anything, she was aligning. Suddenly, the hill was no longer empty. She sensed others around her standing, sitting, leaning against stone walls that no longer existed in the same form. Their presences overlapped with the present, translucent but real. None of them looked at her directly. All of them looked upward. Lyra joined them. The stars brightened, and with them came understanding. The whispers were not meant to predict or warn. They were records of attention. The observatory existed to hold the act of watching itself, to preserve the way human awareness had once reached upward without needing answers in return. Each listener added to it, layering their presence into the stone, the brass, the glass. Lyra felt the weight of that accumulation not as burden, but as inheritance. A single thought surfaced, clear and unbidden. You have always listened. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. She did not wipe them away. I don't know how, she said. I don't know what to do with this. The response was immediate and kind. You already are. The vibration softened. The presences began to fade, not disappearing, but withdrawing respectfully, as if stepping back to allow her space. The stars returned to their familiar arrangement, though Lyra knew now it was only an approximation, a concession to human perception. She lowered her hands, her body trembling not with fear, but with the aftermath of contact. Slowly, carefully, she stepped off the platform. The observatory was quiet again, yet it was no longer empty. Lyra returned to the telescope one last time and adjusted it back to rest. As her fingers left the brass, a final impression lingered: gratitude, shared without ownership. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself and sat against the stone wall, gazing up at the open sky without instruments, without intention. The stars shone back, steady and patient. For the first time in her life, the sense of being out of place did not follow her into the silence. When dawn eventually came, it would not erase what had happened. The listening did not belong to night alone. It lived in attention, wherever and whenever it was offered. Above the hill, the constellations held their distance. Between them, something continued to speak, and Lyra, at last, understood that she had always been listening, long before she ever knew the name of the place that had been waiting for her. The clock that never moved. The entrance revealed itself only after Lyra stopped looking for it. She had returned to the chart room just before dusk, the air already cooling, the stone beginning to release the day's stored warmth. she moved, without urgency, following no map, letting her hands drift along the walls as she had learned to do, slowly, attentively, listening not for sound but for response. That was when the stone beneath her palm felt different, not warmer or colder, not loose or hollow, simply paused. Lyra stilled. The whispers she had grown accustomed to thinned here, drawing inward, as if holding something back. The wall before her bore no marking, no carving, no visible seam. Yet, when she leaned closer, her breath fogged unevenly against the surface, tracing a faint vertical line where the air moved just slightly differently. She pressed gently. The stone did not resist. It yielded with the quiet compliance of something that had been waiting far too long to be touched again. The wall shifted inward, not opening so much as parting, revealing a narrow passage beyond, dark, steep, and untouched by the drifting dust of the upper rooms. Cold air rose from it, carrying a stillness so deep it felt preserved. Lyra hesitated, only once, before stepping inside. The passage descended in a slow spiral, each step shallow and worn smooth. There were no rails, no lamps, no adornment of any kind. Her footsteps made no echo here. The sound seemed absorbed, as if the stone itself were listening more closely than anywhere else in the observatory. With every step downward, the whispers faded, not vanished, contained. At the base of the spiral, the passage opened into a circular chamber, no larger than the central platform above. The ceiling was low and intact, forming a perfect dome of stone etched with faint, unfamiliar symbols. No cracks admitted light from the sky. The chamber existed entirely apart from time of day. At its center stood the clock. It rose from the floor like a solitary pillar carved from pale stone and veined with lines of brass that formed intricate spirals and arcs. Embedded within it were rings, some metal, some glass rings concentrically, each etched with markings, too precise to be decorative. At the heart of it all rested a circular face, smooth and unmarked, without numbers, without hands. The clock was utterly still. Lyra approached slowly, her pulse loud in her ears. The air here was dense, pressing gently against her skin. She felt as though she had stepped into the held breath of centuries. "This is where you've been hiding," she whispered, unsure whether the words were meant for the clock or for herself. The whispers did not answer. Instead, a new sensation surfaced, weight, not physical, but emotional. The chamber carried a gravity that had nothing to do with mass. Every step felt significant. Every breath felt counted. She circled the clock once, then again, up close. The craftsmanship was astonishing. The brass lines were not merely inlaid, they were integrated into the stone, as though grown there rather than added. The glass rings caught what little ambient light existed and bent it subtly, creating faint halos that shifted as she moved. Lyra reached out, then stopped. A sudden tension tightened her chest, not fear, but restraint. The clock did not resist her presence. It warned her of importance. She lowered her hand and sat on the stone floor instead, folding her legs beneath her. She closed her eyes and listened, not outward, but inward, to the quiet impressions that gathered when she allowed herself to be still. Images surfaced. She saw the observatory as it once was, bustling softly with life, not crowded, but purposeful. The spiral passage had been used sparingly, reverently. Only a few ever descended here. Their movements were slow, deliberate, heavy. With understanding, she sensed moments brief, vivid, suspended. A woman standing at the edge of a battlefield, the night sky blazing above her as she made a choice that would ripple through generations. A child born beneath an unusual alignment, their first breath taken as the clock stirred faintly in this chamber. A traveler turning back at the last possible moment, fate bending not through force, but through awareness. Lyra opened her eyes, breath-catching. "These aren't predictions," she said softly. "They're anchors." The realization settled into her bones. The clock was not built to change time. It was built to preserve moments that mattered not because they altered the future in grand ways, but because they crystallized it. Points where intention and circumstance met, where attention sharpened reality into something unforgettable. Destiny, she understood, was not a path. It was a series of moments fully witnessed. She rose slowly and stepped closer. This time, when she reached out, the clock did not hesitate. Her fingertips brushed the smooth, unmarked face at its center. The chamber responded immediately. A deep vibration passed through the stone floor, low and steady, like the turning of something immense far below the surface. The brass lines within the clock began to glow faintly, not with light, but with presence. The glass rings shifted, just a fraction realigning themselves with a soundless precision that made Lyra's breath hitch. The clock had moved, not forward, not backward, awake. Tears welled in Lyra's eyes as the weight of understanding pressed fully into place. She saw herself not as she was now, but across moments of her own life she had never fully understood. Standing in doorways she almost did not cross, pausing before words she chose not to speak, lingering beneath skies she could not explain her attachment to. She had always been near these moments, always watching. "You weren't calling me to fix anything," she whispered, voice trembling. "You were calling me to remember." The clock's vibration deepened, then steadied. Images flowed, not overwhelming now, but measured, offered. She saw the observatory's builders, not as masters of time, but as caretakers of attention. They understood that moments of destiny were fragile not because they could be broken, but because they could be forgotten. So they built this place, a listening post not just for stars, but for meaning. Lyra's hands trembled as she rested both palms against the clock. The stone was no longer cold. It carried a gentle warmth, as if acknowledging her presence. A final realization surfaced, quiet and undeniable. She was not the keeper of the clock. She was its witness. The clock did not need tending. It needed remembering. And those who could listen truly listen would always find their way here when the weight of unobserved moments grew too heavy. The glow softened. The rings settled. The clock returned to stillness. Lyra withdrew her hands slowly, reverently. The chamber felt different, now not lighter, but complete. The tension had eased into something steadier, more resolute. She sat, once more on the stone floor, letting the emotion move through her without resistance. Tears fell freely now, from sadness, but from the quiet ache of recognition. She did not need to act. She did not need to intervene. Witnessing was enough. When she finally stood, the spiral passage awaited her, unchanged. The climb back felt longer, heavier, but not oppressive. Each step carried with it the understanding that nothing above had shifted, only her place within it. As she emerged into the upper chamber, night had fully fallen. the stars greeted her again, sharp and innumerable. The observatory felt attentive, calm, as if satisfied. Lyra moved to the center platform and looked up, her heart steady in a way it had never been before. She did not reach for the telescope. She did not raise her hands. She simply watched. Above her, the sky continued its endless motion. Below her, stone and dust held centuries of remembered moments. Between them stood Lyra, quiet, observant, present. The clock below remained still, and for the first time, she understood that stillness was not absence, it was preservation. When the sky spoke back, Lyra did not sleep. She remained within the observatory through the long thinning of night, wrapped in stillness, seated at the center platform as the stars slowly loosened their hold on the sky. Time passed differently, now not measured in hours, but in subtle shifts of color, in the way cold retreated inch by inch from the stone. In the deepening quiet that came just before dawn, the observatory felt alert, not restless, not urgent, awake in the way a breath pauses just before it is released. Above her, the stars had begun to fade, not vanish, but soften, their sharp brilliance giving way to a gentler glow. The sky lightened, almost imperceptibly, dark blue thinning toward gray, then toward something like pearl. The horizon held a fragile brightness, as if the day were waiting politely to enter. Lyra sensed the alignment before she saw it. The whispers long familiar now had changed again. They were no longer fragmented impressions or gentle echoes. They gathered into coherence, rising through the observatory like a tide that knew exactly where it was meant to reach. She felt it in her chest first, a steady expansion, warm and calm, not overwhelming. Her breathing aligned naturally with it, deepening without effort. The stone beneath her feet hummed faintly, not with sound, but with recognition. She stood. The air around her seemed to brighten from within, as though light were being drawn upward through the hill itself. The broken dome framed the sky perfectly, its ruined ribs no longer feeling like absence, but like intention open by design. Lyra lifted her gaze. At the exact point where night loosened into day, a final constellation held its shape just long, enough to be seen clearly, brighter than it had been moments before, suspended between fading and persistence. Its stars aligned precisely with the carvings along the observatory walls, light slipping into ancient grooves as though the stone had been waiting centuries for this moment alone. The observatory responded. The whispers rose not louder, but fuller. They flowed through the space, no longer confined to stone or metal or memory. They moved freely now, threading through air and light, gathering around Lyra without pressing against her. For the first time, she did not brace herself. She listened. The sky spoke back, not in words, not in visions, but in understanding so immediate it bypassed thought entirely. Lyra felt the meaning settle into her with a gentleness that brought tears to her eyes. This was what the observatory had been built for, not for domination of the heavens, not for prediction or control, but for this precise convergence when night and day met, when observation became communion, when attention itself was answered. She felt the countless moments held within the stone rise and align with the present. All the watching, all the waiting, all the quiet devotion layered across generations. None of it had been lost. None of it had been in vain. Lyra was not alone here. She sensed presences again, not overlapping as before, not crowding the space, but standing at a respectful distance. Those who had listened before her were present only as echoes of attention, their awareness folded gently into the structure of the moment. They did not ask anything of her. They witnessed with her. The sky brightened further, color blooming softly across the horizon. Pale gold seeped upward, brushing the undersides of thinning clouds. The stars retreated gracefully, their light dissolving into daylight without resistance. As the last of them faded, the whispers peaked. Lyra felt it like a final breath drawn together, everything the observatory had held, everything it had remembered, gathering once more. Then, slowly, carefully, it released. The whispers did not vanish abruptly. They thinned, softened, their impressions stretching into silence, the way sound fades across open water. The vibration beneath her feet eased. The hum within her chest settled into a steady warmth. The observatory exhaled. Lyra remained standing, eyes lifted, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks. She did not wipe them away. They felt like part of the moment, as natural as the light now spilling into the chamber. She understood then that this was not an ending, it was a completion. The observatory had awakened fully, not to begin something new, but to finish what it had been holding open for centuries. The listening had been answered. The sky had spoken back not with revelation, but with acknowledgement. You were heard. The realization settled into her with a profound calm. Lyra felt no surge of power, no sense of command or transformation. What she felt instead was clarity, lean and steady, like air after a storm. The restlessness that had once pulled her from place to place had quieted, not disappeared, but softened into something more purposeful. She knew now why she listened. She was not meant to keep the observatory alive through action or ritual. She was not meant to teach others or guard its secrets. Her role was simpler and deeper. She was meant to remember, to carry forward the act of attention itself, not bound to this hill or this structure, but woven into her way of moving through the world. Wherever she went, listening would continue. The observatory no longer needed to hold all of it. It had entrusted some of it to her. As the sun crested the horizon, light poured fully into the observatory, illuminating every crack, every instrument, every worn surface. Dust motes shimmered in the air, no longer like stars, but like something humbler and just as beautiful. Lyra turned slowly, taking it all in. The place felt quieter now, but not empty. Peace had replaced anticipation. The stones no longer leaned toward her attention. They rested. She walked to the edge of the chamber and placed her hand against the wall, feeling the cool solidity beneath her palm. No rush of memory came, no whisper followed, and that was right. "Thank you," she said softly. The words did not echo. They did not need to. Lyra stepped out of the observatory as morning settled fully over the hill. The wind greeted her again, lighter now, carrying the scent of grass and new warmth. The land below was waking birds calling, distant movement beginning to stir. She descended the slope slowly, pausing once to look back. The observatory stood quiet against the brightening sky, its broken dome gleaming faintly in the sun. It no longer felt like something waiting. It felt complete. Lyra turned away without sorrow. As she walked on, she noticed things she might once have missed: the rhythm of her footsteps, the way light pooled in shallow dips of the land, the quiet conversations carried by wind through tall grass. The world felt newly articulate, not louder, but clearer. She smiled, small and unguarded. The sky had spoken back, and in its silence afterward, Lyra carried forward a quiet sense of purpose, not grand, not urgent, but enduring. To listen, to remember, to stand fully present in the moments that asked to be witnessed before they slipped into time. Above her, the daylight held steady between the stars. Something rested, and Lyra walked on, at peace, knowing that wherever she listened, the sky would always recognize her. The keeper of silent orbits. Morning unfolded slowly across the valley, light spilling downward like water finding its path. From the hilltop, Lyra watched as shadow loosened its hold on the land below. Fields emerged first, then winding paths, then the distant roofs of the village, catching the sun in brief, quiet flashes. Nothing rushed. Even the birds seemed to wait between calls, as if the world itself were listening for something that had already been said behind her. The observatory stood unchanged. Stone remained stone. The broken dome still opened its ribs to the sky. Dust lay where it always had, and yet the place felt different, not emptied, not abandoned, but gently sealed, like a book closed after its final page had been read with care. Lyra stood for a long while without moving, the morning breeze lifting strands of her hair, her coat warming gradually as the sun climbed higher. She felt no urgency to leave, no pull to stay, only a calm balance between the two. The observatory was sleeping again. She understood that now, not as a metaphor, but as a state. Its purpose had not ended. It had simply settled. The listening it had held so carefully for centuries no longer pressed outward. It rested, complete, its work folded into the quiet architecture of stone and sky. Lyra turned toward it. One last time, there were no whispers waiting for her, no tremor beneath her feet, no sensation behind her eyes. The silence was clean, unadorned, and deeply respectful. It did not feel like loss. It felt like trust. She stepped forward and placed her palm against the outer wall. The stone was cool, sunlit, ordinary. That, too, felt right. "You can rest," she murmured not. But as a reassurance, the observatory did not respond. It did not need to. Lyra began her descent. The path down the hill curved gently, guiding her through tall grass that whispered only with the movement of air. Each step felt grounded, present. Her body remembered the terrain easily, as though it had walked this way many times before. Even if her memory could not say when as she walked, she noticed the subtle order of things, the way clouds drifted in slow arcs above the valley, the way sunlight pooled in certain places and passed lightly over others, the way the world moved in patterns, not meant to be rushed or altered, only witnessed, silent orbits, she thought, not just of stars, but of lives below her. The valley stretched wide and patient. People were beginning their days sun-aware of alignments, of ancient listening posts, of moments preserved in stone far above them. And yet, Lyra felt no divide between herself and them, no separation. The listening was not exclusive. It never had been. She reached a flat place along the slope and paused, turning slowly in a full circle. The hill rose behind her. The valley opened ahead. The sky arched above, vast and quiet, holding no message, offering no sign. For the first time, that silence did not feel like absence. It felt like continuity. Lyra breathed in deeply, filling her lungs with cool morning air. As she exhaled, a realization settled into her, not sudden, not dramatic, but steady and enduring. The whispers had not vanished. They had changed residence. She did not hear them as she once had. No impressions stirred in the stone beneath her boots. No memories brushed her awareness unbidden, but something remained subtle, integrated, alive within her attention. When she looked at the valley, she did not simply see it, she witnessed it. That, she understood, was the inheritance. The observatory had not made her special. It had reminded her of something she had always carried, the capacity to listen without needing reply, to hold moments gently as they passed, preserving them not in stone or brass, but in care. Future dreamers would come. She knew this with quiet certainty. They would feel the same restlessness she once had, the same pull toward unfinished places. They would stand beneath stars or dawn light and feel something stir without knowing why. They might find the observatory. It did not matter. The listening would find them either way. Lyra resumed walking, her pace unhurried. As the hill lowered behind her, the observatory slipped gradually from view, hidden again by distance and angle. She did not look back this time. There was no need. By the time she reached the valley floor, the sun was fully risen. Warmth spread easily now, touching skin and stone alike. The sounds of the waking world grew clearer footsteps. Voices carried faintly on the breeze. The low rhythm of daily life resuming its familiar orbit. Lyra felt herself re-enter it without resistance. She walked through the valley as she might have before, yet everything felt subtly reorganized. She noticed pauses between sounds, the way people hesitated before speaking, the unspoken weight carried in certain glances, certain silences, moments of destiny. The clock had called them, not moments of spectacle, moments of attention. Lyra did not interfere. She did not linger unnecessarily. She did not try to hold what was not hers to hold. She moved through the world lightly, attentively, allowing each moment to complete itself. When she reached the edge of the village, she stopped beside a narrow stream that cut through the land. Sunlight danced across its surface, scattering into fragments too fleeting to capture. She watched until the pattern shifted, then she smiled. There was no ceremony to mark what she had become, no title spoken aloud, no vow made beneath the sky, and yet the name formed naturally within her. The keeper of silent orbits, not a guardian, not a guide, not a messenger, a witness who carried forward what could not be stored anywhere else. As Lyra stepped into the village and continued on her way, the observatory slept on the hill above stone, steady beneath the open sky, its purpose fulfilled without display. The stars would continue their paths, the dawns would come and go, the world would move, as it always had, and somewhere among it, Lyra would listen, not for whispers, but for meaning, carried quietly forward, for those who would one day feel the same pull and find, within themselves, the courage to listen back. Thank you for listening to Whispers from the Ancient Observatory. May the stillness of this story stay with you through the night. If these quiet worlds speak to you, remember to subscribe to Whispers of the Night. More stories are waiting, soft, slow, and filled with stars. Until then, sleep peacefully and keep listening.